my patient clients that come to me, they might be consuming fruit and honey, and I get them to go off it, and visceral fat will go away.
Well, good morning. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. It's good to see you again. So
it's a bit of a stressor taking care of a chest painer, but I got through it. So
my
I'm here.
Goodness.
I didn't realize I have that clinical issue right to the end there. So
that's a fun way to start the morning. Somebody having chest pain. Goodness. Well,
they were carnivore.
Yeah, well, of course not. No. Are you okay to go then? And everything is,
I am. Yeah, I'm good. I'm free for the next 3 hours. So
okay. Well, I don't know that I have 3 hours, but we've got.
Yeah.
So let me start by saying, appreciate what you've been doing. You've been continuing to advocate for diet and lifestyle, which I think more of us as physicians just have to do and need to do. I mean, we have a healthcare system that is just not serving its purpose, in my view, particularly when it comes to chronic disease. You've been a champion of, the argument that visceral fat is a problem, is it may be one of the more significant problems. Do you care? How did you derive that? I mean, what was a calculus that said, hey, we got to really look after visceral fat is a big issue?
Yeah. So great question. So it really came down to, I'd like to say I figured it out on my own, but I've got to give credit to my research colleague, Dr. Zheng, who's an MD, PhD epidemiologist. And he was researching low back pain, Shawn. He was actually doing MRIs of the back. And he knows the patients, because of the intense problem and challenge that low back pain plays with patients. About 80% of our country goes to an emergency room at some point for low back pain. It's a severe, significant form of chronic disease. So he was researching it, and he just anecdotally picked up when he was doing these MRIs of the LS spine, lumbar sacral spine, that he saw the ones that were most symptomatic and most problematic had this anterior aspect, this collection of tissue, visceral fat, and the anterior aspect of that spine in their abdomen. So he just correlated that, and he decided to shift his entire focus off of back pain and studying the spine to just visceral fat, because he noticed that it also correlated with so many other forms of chronic disease. So he and I met, and he introduced me to that biomarker, and he told me, if you're interested in health, you better check out visceral fat. Come in. And he owned an MRI scanner. He was that serious. He bought an MRI scanner. I mean, you talk about a serious researcher. And so he scanned me. And from that point on, I just dot connected how incredibly important visceral fat was. And I joined his research practice looking at, we finalized about almost 6,000 patients. We scanned their abdomens looking at visceral fat. So I have about 8 years, close to 8 years now, just scanning patients, looking at visceral fat, correlating it to chronic disease in their life. And I'll just say, I don't know of a single biomarker that's more effective to reverse chronic disease and improve the health of patients than focusing in on visceral fat and getting rid of it. So unless you, Shawn, I'd love to ask you, I always like to ask other doctors, what do you think is the most important thing? If you could follow just one thing, what do you think would be the most important thing to help people get healthier? I think it's visceral fat.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd have to think on that, to be honest. Let me ask you before we get into that, because why do we even have visceral fat? I mean, it's there. I mean, you can't have zero, right? I mean, the goal is not zero, correct? I assume no.
So I'd like to say the goal would be to reduce it, because it doesn't really provide any beneficial effect. There's no strong selling points to it. Some people I see online that it provides some sort of a benefit to trauma.
So basically padding, right?
Yeah, I don't think that's really the case. And with that, if that was the case, then nature would put in a substance that didn't secrete, all these inflammatory, toxifying substances that cause inflammation and disease throughout the body as a result. So there's a linear relationship. It's two factors: the amount of visceral fat you have and the length of time. So a lot of studies just look at the quantity, but it's quantity over length of time. So that's a really important aspect. So a lot of people may suddenly acquire a lot of visceral fat, not have any problems, but the longer they maintain that, then the problems kick in. And a lot of people may have very small amounts of visceral fat, but over a long period of time, and they have disease. So it's really quantity and time that dictates how much disease and how much problem you're going to get from your visceral fat.
Yeah, and I mean, I assume you've never seen anybody with zero visceral fat. Because you can't even the leanest bodybuilder. I mean, they still retain 3%, 4% body fat by whatever method you want to use. Otherwise, they're dead basically, even if it's subcutaneous. And so, how do we quantify? I mean, MRI. Obviously, most of us can't sit in an MRI scanner. I know you've looked at a number of associative things. You looked at some facial anatomy. I know there's a study where you lay down and you can look at your abdominal protrusion basically. How does the average person with absent an MRI scanner quantify visceral fat?
Yeah. So what's interesting is I've learned over a period of time to pretty reliably infer how much visceral fat somebody has. So first of all, Shawn, you're doing pretty good. I mean, really good. I mean, the carnivore community ought to just applaud you from a visceral fat level. So if you ever had a scan, I can tell by your face, you have the shape of your face and your facial creases, these nasal labial folds that get in your face are really diminished. They've diminished over a period of time as a result of you going zero carb and your diet. So you can tell by the face and you can tell by the shape of the abdomen. I'll turn my torso here. And you can, this distance here, the sagittal abdominal diameter, you can look at guys our age and women in their 50s, and they start to protrude their abdomen. No matter what they do in their 50s and especially 60s, it's in there. You can't suck that back in. And that is, in my opinion, the influence of visceral fat causing sarcopenia and relaxation of your abdominal musculature and your abdominal fascia and tissues that simply hold in your gut. So the more it sticks out, it's not just the quantity of visceral fat, but the influence of that visceral fat. So I have MRIs of people that I've managed to get rid of visceral fat and their bellies still stick out, but it's because of that visceral fat that they previously had. And as they continue to stay zero carb, continue carnivore, those tissues recover. And then they get a nice, flat abdomen. I'll pull, my abdomen is pretty flat, my plane, sagittal abdominal diameter. So that's one way to tell is what that sagittal abdominal diameter is, that the diameter of your abdomen when you're standing up is helpful to infer that. So when you're 18, 20 years old, everything just stayed in there. Your tissues work so well, it could hold your guts in. And then after a period of time, the influence of that visceral fat starts to take it away. So I think we've lost in our species the ability to look at people. We don't pay attention to appearance. Today, it's like politically not popular and incorrect, really, to look at people's bodies and start forming evaluations and judgments and assumptions about how they live their lives. But let me tell you, 4 million years, that's what we did. Because if you were the alpha leader of the clan and we were going to go out hunt, you would take people based on how they looked and how they performed, and nothing else. That's what it comes down to: your quality of life, how you look, and how you perform. And so we've lost the capacity to look at people and their appearance to evaluate how healthy they were and to help them out. You could see that somebody was starting to fall behind or getting disease or something, some condition, we'd be able to pick it up. But today we've lost that capability. Now we rely on blood work and we have to do MRIs and CTs and things like that. But for 4 million years, we didn't do that. And we always got better. Today we have science and all this blood work and we're getting worse. We're falling apart. So it's not technology. It's really lifestyle choices and just our senses to be able to figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, I pointed this out. I mean, if you look at the degree of chronic disease, obesity, diabetes, whatever, it's obviously increased. Even though our technology, our ability to assess and measure and take 60,000 lab tests, where our grandparents didn't have that, and they didn't have, some of these same issues. Now, maybe they had more infectious disease, perhaps, if we go back 100 years or 150 years. One of the things, because everybody, I mean, you don't have the subtlety anymore. People are ginormous. I mean, it's like, well, how do you look at the facial fold on somebody who's 320 pounds? It doesn't really matter at that point. So I think the nuance and the subtle changes that you may be looking at, it's hard to see. You keep mentioning zero carb, and I know you've been concerned with a lot of people that are just consuming massive amounts of fruit and other things. Are you seeing evidence, MRI evidence, that increases visceral fat again? Or, I mean, have you had enough chance to examine those people that have done that and then they've kind of changed back? How's that affecting people?
Yeah, not enough that I can draw reliable conclusions other than anecdotally. In the cases of my patient clients that come to me, they might be consuming fruit and honey, and I get them to go off it, and visceral fat will go away. But I do also give a lot of other recommendations, high intensity exercise and optimizing sleep, and so there is the potential for confounding, but I do believe that the addition of fruit and honey brings the peril of increasing visceral fat. I'd like to see large studies where larger number of patients we could follow them over a period of time with honey and fruit, and actually take a look at both of them separately. But yeah, I follow people online, and it looks like their abdomens are growing, their sagittal abdominal diameter is increasing, and so I don't promote fruit and honey. The only fruit that I recommend or could go along with eating is wild fruit without a lot of fructose. And twice I've tried adding in honey, and once I went zero carb, Shawn, I got visible pulses throughout my body. My radial, my brachial, my abdominal aortic, iliacs, femorals, medial knees, dorsalis pedis, and posterior tibialis. All my pulses became visible, so they would flash. So when I took honey 2 separate times over 2 weeks, the pulses went away. So I Googled, and you can take a look at these studies. The consumption of carbohydrates inhibits the production of nitric oxide. So I suspect that that's probably what happened. My visible pulses, and by the way, I think for most of our 4 million years, we had visible pulses, that we'd be able to see these visible pulses, that nitric oxide increases. When I go out in the sunshine, they get larger. When I do sprinting, they get larger. When I go into a sauna, they get larger. And when I do fasting, I'm a practitioner of extended fasting. Those pulses, the magnitudes, and all 4 of those have been shown in studies to increase nitric oxide. So the corollary there is the addition of carbohydrates has been known to inhibit the production of nitric oxide. And I know there's one study that shows that honey is associated with the production of nitric oxide, but it's not a particularly convincing study from my perspective when I took a look at it. So to answer your question, I would love to see more studies that take a look at what role does honey and fruit play with the potential contribution of visceral fat. But for anecdotal experiences I've seen in my patients, it's strong enough for me to cut it out. And in every case, when they have, they reduce their visceral fat.
Interesting. And because you mentioned, I mean, obviously being able to see your pulse is some of that's going to depend on overall subcutaneous fat. If you got a lot of fat tissue, you're never going to see your pulses. So this presumes you're lean already, and then maybe the nitric oxide with the vasodilation that it's associated with helps to facilitate that, I suppose. You had mentioned, so one of the questions we hear a lot about, well, haven't recently, but in times past, brown fat, white fat. I believe that's considered visceral fat still, based on its location. How does the utilization of brown fat or the conversion of brown fat versus white fat, supposedly, how does that play a role, or do you have a role for that?
Yeah. So, first of all, I think it's a really important topic, and I'm glad that you're bringing it up, and I hope you delve into it more. Brown fat and beige fat, which is kind of a transition between white fat and brown fat. You get this transition, and as it turns out, subcutaneous fat which is usually white fat, and so is visceral fat. It can go through a transition where either it becomes more beige, and it's basically through the addition of mitochondria, the powerhouses of our bodies that produce ATP. And so with the adaptation of a healthier lifestyle, you can drive the production of mitochondria towards the beiging, if that's such a word, making more beige, making white fat more beige by high intensity exercising and dietary changes to include cutting out processed foods and cold immersion. Those things all help to increase the mitochondria within fat. So the visceral fat is clearly white. Your brown fat, most of it actually concentrates around the spine and within the thoracic region. So they're really, when you start to consume and burn your white fat, it goes off, and it's more your subcutaneous fat that turns beige and not really to turn to true brown fat. We see brown fat with the highest density of mitochondria really within the thoracic region and of your back. So I think it's really a wonderful area to talk about these different depots. There's also pericardial fat, fat around the heart. There's also pancreatic fat. There's fat within the liver. And this is a really cool one that I didn't talk with you about the first time I was on, but myosteatosis. So fatty infiltrates within the legs, within the musculoskeletal system. And I know you had my dear friend and colleague, or physician colleague, Dr. Carlos Moreira on. Mm-hmm. And he was the one who actually acquainted me with a study that talks about Galday's, I think, criteria, where it looks at these fatty infiltrates around the shoulder for the purposes of evaluating the likelihood that a repair of the rotator cuff is going to be successful. So an orthopedic surgeon can look at that MRI, see these fatty infiltrates, and if there are too many of them, it's a contraindication to doing the surgery because they're just going to have a bad outcome. So these fatty infiltrates really cause inflammation and impair healing and recovery, but they correspond, very interesting, Shawn, to visceral fat. So since the last time I was on your show, I routinely now scan through the femurs and I evaluate fatty infiltrates within the skeletal muscle because it always corresponds to visceral fat. And so that may be a really powerful proxy for looking at health rather than looking at fat. And associated with these fatty infiltrates, there's also sarcopenia. So you see the reduction in both the muscle mass and the strength of the skeletal muscle. So that's a really cool biomarker for you to be aware. And I know you're an orthopedic surgeon, but I'm just amazed that criteria hasn't yet been used by orthopedic surgeons in other areas, maybe with total knee replacements or total hip replacements or back surgery, that they ought to be looking at that criteria as well. But I certainly am, as a health and performance optimizing physician. I am now scanning through skeletal muscle to look at these fatty infiltrates.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I can remember operating on all kinds of people and just a subcutaneous fat, with different qualities. Some would be bright yellow, some would be very, very white, and the texture was very different. And I just observed. You didn't know what to do with it. It was like, oh, this is interesting. But some people had a really slippery fat, and some people it wasn't so slippery. It was just kind of an interesting thing. But yeah, you're certainly right when it comes to evaluating for a rotator cuff repair. If they've got a lot of fatty infiltration into the supraspinatus or subscapularis, the likelihood of a repair being effective is diminished because we think the muscle is no longer functional. It's been turned into a glob of fat. It's going to lose its contractile properties, and I'm not surprised at all it correlates with visceral fat and probably, who knows, fatty liver and all these other things that are in there. So, um, obviously it's a problem. I think most people, when we are, one of the things I've sort of read, I'm sure you can confirm this, is visceral fat's one of the first things to appear and one of the first things to go when we gain weight typically. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it is. So that the good news is I'm just plugging in my power cable here, using all the data in this video. But visceral fat. The good news is that visceral fat is indeed one of the first things to go away when you start to adopt a healthier lifestyle. So the two things, well, there's four things to get rid of visceral fat, and we see it go away immediately and with this visceral fat, and not the subcutaneous fat that follows. Takes longer, and it's not as receptive to these interventions. But the four things I look at are carbohydrates diet, particularly processed foods, alcohol consumption, a lack of sleep, and then stress. Now, stress is a really interesting one. I recently put a post on a guy that had an MI, 2 MIs within a week. And he changed his job. He thought his job was causing him to have a heart attack. And, we hear about that. But, oh, my God, Shawn, this guy sent me his facial photograph and his abdomen. It's 3 months difference. And I did a posting on it, my Instagram chart. But it's just a huge difference. And the only intervention, the only change was he quit his job and started working outdoors on leather work. He's a leather worker from the United Kingdom, and he makes belts outside in the sunshine, and he looks so much better. And then I'm going to be doing a posting on my identical twin brother. He just left his job. He was doing sales, and now he looks so much better. He didn't change his diet at all. All he did was reduce his stress. So I'm going to be doing a lot more advocacy about not only diet, but stress. We just tolerate way too much stress. So stress is a big source of persistent visceral fat, and contribution of visceral fat through cortisol, which tells our bodies to store adipose tissue to especially visceral fat. So you really want to be limiting the amount of cortisol you have by limiting the amount of stress. We don't do a good job with stress mitigation and stress management. So you want high intensity stress like lifting weights and sprinting and a sauna and a cold shower. That's great stress. That just stresses you briefly. It's a stress hormetic, a resilient building practice. But you do not want sustained stress from like work or vocation where you're constantly being stressed. I use the example. It's like an antelope that's in a safari, and the lions and tigers are just roaming around that poor antelope all the time. That just is going to jack up that cortisol. But if the lions attack and chase it, then it's a high intensity of stress hormetic. It's brief and over with, and it helps to reduce that cortisol. So we got to get rid of the lions and tigers milling around. We just want to get chased by them for a brief period of time, and that's what I advocate with my clients. We want stress hormetic activity, but not sustained stress.
Yeah, I'm just, obviously we know insulin is our hormone of storage, and, we need insulin. We can't have zero insulin. It helps us with obviously storing glucose, building protein, storing fat to some degree, and cortisol and glucagon and, norepinephrine. These are the counter-regulatory. So I wonder how cortisol physiologically acts, because normally it's a counter-regulatory. It opposes, insulin's role. Is it just a chronic stimulation changes a bunch of different things to allow us to store fat easier in the visceral area, perhaps?
Yeah, well, it's really a bad one. I mean, it's catabolic for muscle tissue, so it actually diminishes your muscle tissue, and it's anabolic, for building, causing fat accumulation. So it's doing the exact opposite of what you want. Now, for a short period of time, it helps us, but we tolerate too much stress for too long a period of time. For 4 million years, if there were too many lions and tigers around, we just pick up our TP tent pegs and change to another location. We get out of Dodge. Today, we tolerate that too long. So I think these hormones are very interesting to understand how they work and what precipitates them. But the more I get gray hair, the longer I practice medicine, particularly health and performance optimization, the less labs I do. I mean, I think it's going to come down, and I probably one day I won't do even MRIs. I'll just teach people, and I'm already doing that with my high-end clients, teaching them how to read their bodies, certain factors, cutaneous factors on the skin, to give them an idea about chronic disease and how it's going away if they live appropriately. But these MRIs and lab tests really aren't required. I think it's my definition of health is kind of unusual. I just define it: your appearance and your performance, how you look and how you perform. So, Shawn, you're batting 1,000, man. You're looking good and you perform really well. You're the definition of health. It would be interesting to see your MRI scan to take a look at your visceral fat. Yeah. And for the carnivore community, I would really welcome other people to take a look at it, because I think we're going to, favorably draw attention to that biomarker of visceral fat that's appropriately associated with what I believe is a more optimized diet, which is eating carnivore. And it's certainly the reason why I promote it, because I see resolution of visceral fat and resolution of chronic disease, as you and many of your followers are finding out.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly see the resolution of chronic disease, and I definitely agree with you on the fact that we probably do too many damn labs, and the relevance of which is questionable. A lot of people, there's a lot of nuance there, and people tend to, there's just so many things. I could go off on this stuff forever. Let me ask you a question, because you mentioned sprinting, and I just did. I mean, literally this morning I did a bunch of Windigate tests. I mean, I'm there on the bike doing 30-second all-out sprints, 4-minute rest, and that's a good workout, by the way. But why sprinting over jogging or walking or something like that? Why do you see that as an advantageous, especially for visceral fat? Are you actually in fact seeing that versus somebody that's like a marathon runner?
Yeah, I wish we had studies that elucidate it better. We see a huge release of catecholamines when we sprint, and myokines. There are all these messaging molecules that get released, and there's so many different flavors of them. But it would appear from studies that look at high intensity exercise that these myokines send these messaging molecules to distant parts of the body. So they get released from the large extremity muscles, your quads, your femorals, your glutes. Then they travel to your skeletal muscle and other parts of your body, and they tend to build muscle and to burn fat. So it looks like it's just a biological adaptation. And the way I explain it is from an evolutionary standpoint, an adaptive standpoint, that if you're going to run as fast as you can, that fat really doesn't serve the Homo sapien well to have large reserves of fat. So sprinters, chasing something very quickly and be able to get away from something very quickly are favored by a lean, optimized muscle to fat ratio. So optimal amount of muscle, minimal amount of fat allows you to run faster. You don't see heavy set sprinters. But distance runners just don't burn the fat as much. When I bring people in that are distance runners, they usually have a larger amount of both subcutaneous fat and visceral fat. And then over a period of time, as they continue, particularly as they get older and do a lot of distance running, sarcopenia comes in. As there's this transition point, they start losing muscle mass and they start losing fat, and they just get a kind of an emaciated appearance. But those that do high intensity weightlifting and sprinting, Shawn, preserve that muscle mass and preserve the functionality of that muscle mass and maintain that strength. So the short answer to your question is we need better studies. And I don't know why sprinting is not more popular as a subject of studies, but it really should be, because when I get my clients sprinting, it just eliminates visceral fat within their abdomen very, very quickly. And it sort of, along with like the carnivore diet, I just think there's a bias out there against sprinting. I see it, and against carnivore. And what's kind of sexy is distance running and cholesterol. It seems like, that's what they kind of promote, but you get the biggest change in reduction of disease from high intensity exercise, particularly sprinting and lifting weights, and then going on the carnivore diet.
So let's talk a little bit about maybe frequency and dosing. So, I mean, if someone were to do this, and how long, and there's a question for Charlie here saying, hey, how long does it take the visceral fat to go away once you get adjust everything? But what are you talking about dosage wise? I mean, how many times a week, how long, how much, what's a typical sprinting or training workout look like for what you see?
So great. So what I typically do with clients is try to get them to start slow and work up to it. What you don't want to have happen is you don't want to get an injury. Because if you get injured, you can't hunt. Mm-hmm. You get injured, you can't get away from a predator that's after you. So from that standpoint, you really want to avoid injuries. And when you get to be in your, fifth, sixth decade of life, seventh decade of life, your capacity for recovering from injury is a lot more impaired. So start slow and build up to it. I also like to address DJD, also degenerative joint disease. A lot of people have bad knees, and they feel like they usually acquired it from running, distance running, and so they feel like they can't sprint. So I get them to do just one sprint. Start very, very slow, accelerate to maximum speed, and then hold that for about anywhere from 4 to 10, 12 seconds at maximum speed, and that's your first sprint. So usually people, even with bad knees, runner knees that they've given up running, they can start a practice of slowly acquiring the capacity for sprinting. And if you're a little bit older, a little more challenged, I start my clients sprinting up a hill, because the biomechanics of it are a little bit easier. When you sprint up a hill, it might take a little more strength, but you go slower. And it's not as complicated of movements, therefore. And the worst is sprinting down a hill. You don't ever get anybody trying to sprint down a hill. So level ground, or sprinting up hills, and then gradually work your way up. And depending on your level of health, obviously, if you're young and healthy, you should be able to sprint more and more frequently and more intensely than if you're older. But I have clients in their mid 80s, 80. I have an 85-year-old client, and he sprints. So he doesn't sprint like most of us, but he sprints. I mean, he's running at maximum speed, and he's getting better at it. So it's something that you should be able to do for your whole life, because if you couldn't, you wouldn't be able to eat, and you wouldn't be able to get away from a predator. So the two things I always say that keep Homo sapiens in the gene pool for the most period of time is how well you fought and how fast you could sprint. Those two things defined how long you lived, and most importantly, how well you lived. So fighting and sprinting are really key biological kind of performances that you want to be really good at. And so those are two chief strategies I work with my clients. And obviously I can't encourage them to go out and get in fights and stuff, but I encourage them to lift weights and to exercise through resistance training in a manner that emulates the intensity of a fight. It's short and very, very intense. And that's how I get my clients to really biologically optimize.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at what does it take to be able to sprint. Obviously you mentioned too much body fat is going to slow you down. Joint disease is going to slow you down. Lack of sufficient muscular strength is going to slow you down. Cardiovascular capacity is going to slow you down. So if you maximize all those things, or those things are doing well, which would indicate you're generally healthy, you're going to have a better sprint performance. And I look at, and I've mentioned this before, 100 meters, the world record for 100 meters for an 85-year-old man is about 15 seconds. And so I kind of say, well, hey, maybe you should be able to run 100 meters in under 15 seconds. That's probably a fair cutoff for many people. Now, no, a lot of people aren't going to do that, but I think if you lined up 1,000 people and say which ones could run 100 meters in under 15 seconds, which ones couldn't, maybe there's a differentiator between men and women, but you'd say the ones that fall on the good side are probably going to live longer than the ones that don't. I mean, I think that's a pretty clear. Now, as physicians, we can't do that. We can't say, okay, I mean, I guess we could, but line your patients up and say, hey, go run a 100-meter sprint, and then you write that in the chart and say, okay, you got issues. It's interesting. It's interesting how you assess people, and I think, like you mentioned, you can look at someone, and when we went to medical school, it was like patient appears younger than stated age or older than stated age. I mean, that was part of your initial physical exam, and now we can't. It's like, oh my God, you can't observe. This person looks unhealthy to you. It's like crazy with all the sort of stuff we've gone to. As far as thoughts on protein, fat, I mean, there's within the carnivore community and some of the other communities, some people are really pushing for ketogenic macronutrient ratios with kind of protein considered kind of not as important, where other people are really emphasizing protein. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
So I tend to have shifted, back away from fat a little bit and much more towards protein. I think protein is where it's at. I think, it happened to be the majority of substance on an animal that we would have been consuming, that we would have been dependent upon in the form of protein. So I just think protein should be the macronutrient of choice. It's what I get the best results in terms of my clients to improve their appearance and improve their performance by shifting away from what was previous to carnivore or keto existence. I was eating the keto diet, and I was eating a lot of fat, like a lot of people. And maybe it's helpful for a transition off the carbs that I previously was eating. But now I'm pretty focused on a lot of meat, and I eat nose to tail. I'm not afraid of eating fat, and I eat fat on that animal, but I tend to look for selective, healthiest animals as possible. And, I know there's studies that look at grain and conventional kind of beef and stuff, but, I see that marbling going on, and I see that in humans too, Shawn, when I do MRIs and, the fatty infiltrates in those extremities. So, I would prefer the marbling be, more omega-3 rich fat and from a grass-fed animal. I think we need to do a better job in looking at that studies. But if I have to eat an animal, I'm going to choose the healthiest animal, one that could run like Hades, that looked really good. And I'm thinking that it's probably the animals out in wild instead of the CAFA ones. But I eat conventional beef. I'm going to tell you, I do. I go to Costco and I buy it. I'm still, I got 5 kids, 3 in college and stuff. So I eat a fair amount of that kind of beef. But to answer your question, protein is where it's at, and that's where I start, and that's where I focus. I stay with healthy fat, but when it comes to carbohydrates, I just don't see the benefit. The only carbohydrates I get is from liver. When I consume, liver, it's probably the only carbohydrates that are really going into my body. But otherwise, I stay completely away from carbohydrates and advocate doing so as well.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about studies comparing grain versus grass finished, there's a dearth of that as far as human outcomes are concerned. There's some work being done, University of Utah, I think. Stefan von Vliet is taking up some of that work. I think Fred Provenza and some others are starting to look at that. So hopefully we'll get some more data on that. As far as, so you mentioned, fighting and sprinting, and, there's somebody, one of our guests, Lark, is saying, hey, those sound kind of like traditionally more male-dominated activities, even ancestrally. What about the ladies? Do they need to be fighting and sprinting, or is there a different approach for them, or what are your thoughts?
Heck yeah. Ancestrally, we saw that women were hunters. And, if you look at species, across the globe, there's just one species that kind of feminizes women and into a role where they were less strong and not as fit. And that's Homo sapiens. And it's really more of a cultural role and cultural practice and tradition than is biological. So you would never mess with a mother in the wild with cubs or its offspring. It's going to tear you apart. And so I think Homo sapiens that way. And I'm not advocating for women to be these hypertrophied, muscle bound types, but more more that they're more functional and strong. In the CrossFit community, which I did CrossFit for quite a while. The women were amazing. They were very fit and without being huge muscle bound, they were a lot more functional. And so I am an advocate of women being strong and being very fast. And I think what's good for males is good for females in that way. And it should be a reflection of their health to reflect on their quality of living. And so I get my female clients strong and fast and give them those interventions to work on as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think, certainly with the argument for functionality, it's pretty clear to me. I mean, men, women, doesn't matter. Being stronger, being fitter, being faster is going to provide a functional benefit. Whether it ultimately results in a longer life, I think the jury's still out on that. But I mean, as far as I know how I'd like to live my life, and I'd rather not be asking somebody to carry my luggage up the stairs when I'm, 70 years old. No thanks on that. There's some questions about, just specific to your diet. Eggs, dairy, do any of the things, any of those things creep into the diet at all, or do you utilize those?
Yeah, I do. So I'm a big advocate of eggs. I think they're amazing. I look for real pastured eggs, not the ones that are bought in stores. I go to farmers and I say, do you give your chickens any feed? Feed them any chicken feeds? Because chickens are ground foragers and they go out and eat bugs. So I get my chicken eggs from chickens that are not fed any feed, that just ground forage and out picking bugs and things. In the wintertime, they're fed beetles and mealworms and things like that. So they're kind of carnivore chickens, and the eggs are just amazing. So eggs are part of my practice for a strategy to optimize people. And as far as dairy goes, I'm cautious about dairy. I think there's some pretty compelling studies out there that show that dairy can be very inflammatory. So I work hard to limit the inflammation, and I think we need to study that a little bit more by always insisting that dairy consumption be 100% grass-fed, always organic, so that you're not getting some of the other substances that come from a CAFO, confined animal feeding operation, dairy operation, to be included coming into that milk. And then also it must be plain. It must be unsweetened. It must be full fat, and it must be non-homogenized. So basically you want minimal processed dairy. The only processing, and the last requirement is minimally processed through fermentation. So I prefer and recommend to my clients only dairy that is fermented. So I know I've shared with you, and I saw you post on a time where I drank milk that wasn't fermented for 2 weeks, and boom, I got a little more visceral fat and I got subcutaneous fat. And I was like, forget that, man, I'm never doing milk again. And so I've abandoned drinking non-fermented milk. I allow nature to process that dairy, and it so it reduces the carbohydrates that are in the dairy to begin with, and render it into a more digestible form product that's easier to digest. And I actually feel better when I consume fermented dairy with the meat that I eat, and fermented vegetables. Shawn, I can eat. I'm just going to tell you, I break my fast. I fast 3 days or 4 days a week. I mean, that's a long fast. I break it the same way every time. I go to a Brazilian churrascaria steakhouse. I eat pounds of meat. If I do not have my fermented foods with me, I cannot eat as much in that one time. So I don't get as much for my money. So if I bring these ferments, kvass, kimchi, little fermented sauerkrauts, and it's not quantities, just small little bits with that meat, and I chew it together, I masticate them together in my mouth with the meat, I can eat way more meat and feel way better than if I don't have that with me. So I make sure that I consume some fermented cheese, fermented dairy, and fermented vegetables when I eat meat. I know that's it's not a real pure carnivore approach. But I do that because it's the lectins and toxins that are diminished when you ferment these vegetables. They get eliminated. In one study, 99% of them are eliminated. So I think it does offer the potential for making plants more consumable and less problematic for us in our species. And so I'm studying them, and anecdotally, I support them and encourage my clients to use them.
Yeah, I mean the comment about the fermented dairy, I've spoke to people like Bill Schindler, who anthropology guy, who's talked about.
I know.
So when they talk about dairy, he said, by fermenting it does increase the digestibility, makes it easier for people to tolerate. Which there's probably some decent validity to that. There's a question about, you'd mentioned fasting. I mean, are you doing 24-hour fast? Or are you doing something longer, 3 days a week? And then the following question was are you coupling workout to a fasted state? Do you think doing high intensity interval training has any benefit? I know the studies out there saying it doesn't really matter calorically, but are there any additional benefits to doing it in a fasted state, or do you bother with that?
Heck yeah. So yeah, it's a really popular topic. I love that question. So first of all, I do extended fasting, and it is straight zero carb. The only 0 calorie, 0 carbs, of course. The only little bit of calories that come in are for like black coffee. Sometimes I fast with only water, but usually I fast a little bit of black coffee. But otherwise, I'm not consuming anything for 72 hours, a minimum fast, 72 hours, and up to 96 hours. And that is when I get my most intense workouts. Yeah, I'm in a fasted state, so it's a little more challenging, but that's when we go out and hunt. We didn't go out and hunt when we had full bellies. We would go out and hunt when we had digested that food. So my highest intensity exercise is always reserved towards the end of my fast, and that's where I'm always sprinting and doing squatting and doing the most intense workouts in a fasted state. And I think I've got great greens. I'm 59 years old, and I have never been in better shape ever in my life than the way I am right now. So I think it is attributable to fasting and the carnivore 0 carb diet, and then exercise and sprinting and doing high intensity exercise. And I do other things, sauna, cold showers, and sunshine, and I optimize my microbiome. So there's quite a bit of other things going on. But to answer your users' questions, it's I do extended fasting, and that's when I exercise.
You said you fast 3 times a week, 72 hours, 3 times a week. That seems like
no, just once a week.
Oh, okay.
For 3.
Got it.
But yeah, 3 days a week for a minimum of either 72 up to 96 hours a week. And I don't know, I just keep increasing. I'll just tell you, somebody else might beat me to it, but I'm going to look at doing a 5-day fast and a 2-day feed. Now, buddy, if I do that, when I come off my 4-day fast, I'm all about meat. I get up in the morning and that's all I'm doing. I'm recovering. I'm hitting that bison, right? I got that carcass and that I hunted, the night before. I'm hitting that as soon as I wake up. I'm eating meat all day long, and I feel fantastic. So I'm eating and I'm not working out for 2 days. I don't work out. I just eat, and it's fantastic. So I think I might try doing a 5-day fast and 2-day feed where, I'm just eating, and maybe not even working. But I don't exercise those first 2 days when I recover from my extended fast.
Yeah, kind of like a lion sitting in the Serengeti when they've eaten, they're just laying around. And it's kind of funny if I've had the opportunity to go there, and you see a lion, it's got blood on its face, it's eaten recently. The zebra, no, I mean, they're just walking right by it. They don't care because they know that one's not going to get them. They can tell, they recognize this guy's full, I'm in no danger. But 3-4 days from now, you better look out. So it's interesting. What was the other thing I wanted to ask about? As far as, do you pay any mind to sort of circadian biology? Does that time of day, does that Does that affect you in any way, or do you think about that?
Yeah, you like read my mind, because I was hoping I'd be able to talk about this. So here's a really cool thing that I've only picked up for the past maybe 1 month, but there's I don't know if you know Alex Andrew Huebner from Huberman Labs. He was on Joe Rogan, and he had a posting on these 4 supplements, 3 supplements: L-theanine, magnesium, and then apigenin to improve the quality of sleep. So, and they really did improve the quality of sleep, but nothing touches this one intervention that I found to improve the quality of my sleep, and in my clients too that now do this. And it's getting a sunrise and a sunset in. I'm just going to tell you, Dr. Baker, you need to do this. You need to fit this into your practice. So you go for 20, 30 minutes and you watch that sunset, and it's going to release melatonin, the really good endogenous, right, from your pineal gland. And I don't even turn over at nighttime. I sleep so soundly now, I don't even turn over. I don't get up to go to the bathroom. Even if I drink a lot of fluid, I just sleep so deep and restfully from the influence of sunrises and sunsets. But that's what I follow. I think is super important. Circadian rhythms. I think we've got a corrupted artificial existence with this artificial light, synthetic light in our lives. So I think we really need to, at a minimum, go back and experience, integrate within your life sunrises and sunsets, because I think it's a game changer, absolute game changer.
Yeah, I was recently, we were out of town in Laguna Beach, California, and every morning we made an effort to, we did. We walk on the beach in the morning, sunrise, and watch the sunset. It's awesome. It's really neat to do. You're in Minnesota. I think you're in Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken, right, Shawn? So right now you've got extremely long days. I mean, you're probably sunsets after 9 p.m. And so you just, I guess you have to adapt to the seasons, correct? I mean, wintertime, it may be sunset at 4:30, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a real challenge. And this winter, I'm going to try to incorporate, getting up, try to get the sunrise. I'll already be at work probably because it will be dark. And so I'll have to leave my building to go out and get the sunrise and the sunset. But yeah, you just kind of have to adapt to it. The other interesting thing, for the sake of your viewers and your audience, your community, is getting those sunrise and sunsets allow for these infrared rays. So improve your mood. It's not just for sleep, but those infrared rays go into your body and they optimize your hormones. So it's really helpful for anxiety and depression. And also it protects your skin, especially in the summertime, against the damaging UVB rays that are also beneficial, help you form vitamin D. But the burning that you can experience between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. is greatly mitigated by exposing your skin first to infrared rays around sunrise and sunset. So when I deployed to the Middle East for the military, thank you for your service. I'm still active, Army National Guard. When I deployed recently, I would get up and do the sunrise. That's the desert out there. Forget that. Is it the Sahara Desert? What the heck is that desert? The Arabian Desert? Forgetting there was big desert there all over. I was always in it. And so every morning I'd get out there for about 45 minutes and let it hit my sun. And then when we demoed, came back, I was the only officer who went out and did this, but I washed trucks, Shawn, to help us get out of there. We couldn't go back until all those trucks were washed. I think we had 2,000 trucks to wash. So I'm out there with my shorts, washing these trucks. Everybody else is putting sunscreen on. I never used sunscreen, 10 hours in that desert, no sunscreen. And I didn't even get a little bit burned. Everybody else was burned with the sunscreen on. And I believe it's from the protective benefits of that infrared lighting from sunshine in the morning and at nighttime. So I highly encourage your audience to adopt a practice of exposing their full body. When I mean full body, I mean everywhere. That also, if you get it on your genitalia, it helps increase testosterone significantly and growth hormones. So a lot of benefits. Don't get yourself arrested, but find a secluded area that you can do that.
So it's interesting that we've seen a lot of recent news about sunscreens being recalled due to potential carcinogen issues, and if you look at the dermatologists, they recommend SPF 50,000 indoor. Even they're talking about put sunscreen on indoor, which just sounds absolutely crazy because you might be near a window or something like that. It's kind of interesting. There was a question about, let's say you just, for whatever reason, you can't get out in the sun, and there's these red light devices, these different lights that are out there. Are any of those things worth looking at if say you can't, say it's 20 below zero and you're living in frigging, Anchorage, Alaska, and it's like, man, I just don't want to be walking around in the sun with my shirt off. I mean, what do you do in that situation? Or are those things worthwhile?
Yeah. So my comment about that is I like to think of the infrared lights that's used in technology, sort of like the Impossible Burger, right? If you don't have access to meat, then maybe eat an Impossible Burger, a plant-based burger. But man, you just got to make it happen. I'm just going to go find that meat because I ain't going to eat that Impossible Burger. But if I'm stuck in jail somewhere and that's the only thing going to feed my butt, then I'll eat that daggone Impossible Burger, plant-based meat. So my answer is, by all means, just work harder to get real sunshine, because those infrared lamps are just not going to be as beneficial. The other thing, nobody else talks about this, so I'll just say I haven't seen any studies about it, other than we do know that those infrared rays that come from those eye lights penetrate our skin way deeper than the infrared rays that come from the sun. We're biologically adapted for the sun, but we're not biologically adapted for these deep penetrating rays. So here's my concern. Does that form of energy, which we don't have any biological adaptation for, penetrate regions where we no longer have defenses to that infrared rays, and that ionizing deep energy is penetrating, causing potential methylation errors and contributing maybe to carcinogenesis down the road? There's not a lick of evidence that I can find that support that or that say that, other than we know that infrared rays from these lamps do penetrate deeper. It's just purely speculative, but I've never seen it studied. So I tell people, don't use an infrared sauna. Use a real dry finish sauna. Don't use infrared lights. Go out and get the real beneficial light from the sun, because it's just not going to be as good. There's greater potential for side effects, and the benefits are not going to be as good as the real thing.
Yeah, I think the lesson here, the real thing, is always probably the best thing we can do if possible. I know there was a concern about, say, if you work a shift work and you have to sleep during the day or whatever. I mean, it's or that type of thing, but it's still a challenge. Shawn, we are getting low on time right now, so let me just give this opportunity for you to, if there's anything else you a topic you want to share, and then please provide contact information, social media information, all you know the drill, all that stuff, so people know how to get a hold of you.
Yeah. So what I'm really interested in is I'm a researcher, and I set up a 501c3, so I'm a nonprofit, and so I like to work with alphas. I'd love to have a personality like Dr. Baker. So I work with people that are really serious about becoming the best biological versions of cells, because they're really interesting to study. And if I tell them to give up something, or tell them, I give them a harder thing to do, they're just going to do it because they're really interested in optimizing. They're the best people to kind of study. So if anybody in your community or in your community in Revero have that kind of a mindset that they want to be the best biological version of the cells, they could check me out on my website, Dr. Shawn O'Mara, DrSeanomara.com. And I would be really interested in considering working with him if I think I'm a good fit for them. And but yeah, I think we need more high performers to be more attracted to modeling health and what a healthy lifestyle is. I absolutely believe that it starts with a healthy diet, and then it transitions into exercise. So I'll just end by thanking you, Shawn, for all that you've done. You've been a really great role model for the carnivore community and eating a healthy diet. And I'm super excited to be back with your community talking about this particular space. I think it's just fantastic. We're going to see great things in the future, I think, coming from this.
Yeah, and thank you for championing the whole lifestyle that I think is so important. And it's interesting to see the visceral fat. And I think, I think you're right that is a very good marker. I think there's, like I said, performance and appearance are probably worth a lot more than we think they are, or that's been my sort of experience with trying to figure out how people are healthy or not, and trying to interpret when they say, hey, this lab is a little different than that one. And I'm like, does it really matter? I don't know. Anyway. All right, guys. Well, thank you, Shawn. Thanks, everybody. I got to run. We'll be back tomorrow. I think we got Sam Apple, the author of Ravenous, which is Otto Warburg stuff. That'll be a fun one to do. It's tomorrow as well. Anyway, Shawn, have a great day. Hopefully there's no more chest painters in your day. I hope not. So that's more paperwork, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Yeah.
See you guys later.